Started. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I was just saying to David, I think we've got a smaller audience than normal because there's about 3 or 4 other events happening tonight in the city and a pretty major one happening on campus. But the good news is that we've got David to ourselves and he's promised to answer all those questions we're dying to ask him, so that's great. I'm Lee Markopoulos. I'm the chair of the graduate program in curatorial practice here, and I'm one of the organizers of a series called the Graduate Lecture Series that invites speakers on an annual basis to talk on a subject that we think is interesting. And this year we've been really attracted to the theme translation, a theme that we've stretched beyond language to also encompass the notion of acts of translation, say from ideas to artworks or design to objects or plans to architecture. But we also wanted to think about language under that rubric. So, and we wanted to think even tonight about the act of translating from English into a made-up language or a constructed language. And so we couldn't think of a better person to invite than David Peterson, who is a writer and a language creator, and who unsurprisingly studied English and linguistics, but went on to, very surprisingly, create numerous languages. Including perhaps most notably Dothraki and Valyrian for HBO's series Game of Thrones, which I'm sure you've either watched or heard of. And then also languages, 7 languages for the Syfy? 4. 4 languages for Defiance on Syfy, which have got really great names, names like Castithan, Irathiant, and Omic. And he also created the language used by the Dark Elves in the movie Thor, The Dark World. And so in 2007, David co-founded the Language Creation Society. That must be one of the more esoteric societies of the world, and served as its president from 2012 to 14. And surely he's one of only 2 or 3 people with a TV credit of alien culture consultant. I like it. And the man who has been described in an article in Forbes magazine in 2013 as having the coolest job ever. David's also active as a writer. His 3rd book is being released today, and we've got copies outside, and David's happy to sign them. It's called The Art of Language Invention, From Horse Lords to Dark Elves, The Words Behind World Building. But first, before we get onto the book, some tales from Westeros and more. Over to you, David.
Thanks. Thank you all for coming, by the way. And don't you worry, I've spoken to smaller crowds than this. I once entertained my sister for an entire afternoon talking about nothing. Anyway, so the title of my talk, I did this. There you go. Ah, fancy. You'll find out what that means later. All right, so since we're talking about translation, the first thing that always occurs to me is this awesome quote by Jacques Derrida, which is, "Oui, oui, vous m'entendez bien, ce sont des mots français," which, if you translate it, means, yes, yes, you are receiving me, these are French words. Now, the interesting thing about this phrase is that the moment you translate it, you actually destroy it, because these are not French words. In fact, none of these are French words. So what you did was you took a true statement from being true to being false simply by translating it, which is a really kind of a bizarre notion when you think about what translation is supposed to be. Anyway, so you heard some of my background. I'll go over briefly. So yes, I've created languages. These are the languages I've created for Game of Thrones. This is Defiance. I created writing systems for them as well that appear in the show. That was fun. Then there was this show. Anybody see this show? Yeah. It lasted 1 season. It was very dear to my heart. And it's sorely missed by a devoted following. Anyway, it was a show called Star-Crossed. It was on the CW last year, and I created a language called Sondive, and I also convinced them to let me do a writing system for that, which was really cool. I created a language for Thor, The Dark World, but they didn't actually have me create a writing system, but basically this language has 1 fan, and this fan is really ecstatic and devoted, so one day I just created a writing system for it, basically just for her. So there it is. Anybody watch Dominion by any chance? Just finished its 2nd season on Syfy. And it's approximately this. That is, angels fighting with swords against humans with guns. That's really actually a very good description of the show. Dominion, I created a language called Lishepus for it. The 100, if anybody watches that. Really? Yeah, all right. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Anyway, I created a language called Trigetta Slang starting in season 2. We're currently filming season 3. And then, possibly my favorite show that I've ever worked on, Penny Dreadful. Has anybody watched this? It's so good. It's really kind of violent. But God, is it good. And this woman right here deserves all of the Emmys and gets none of the nominations. I really don't understand it. Penny Dreadful is amazing. I created essentially the devil's language for season 2. Anyway, so that's what I did, but to give you an idea of exactly what my job entails, I figured I would use a more well-known example from Game of Thrones. So we do have audio on this if it's not loud enough, or if it's too loud, I'll go and adjust the volume. But here it is. This is from season 3, episode 4, towards the end. This is Daenerys. If you don't know stuff about Game of Thrones, ask me. I'll just tell you what it is. Anyway.
Is it done then? They belong to me. Indas lysa sertida.
Sertida.
This is done.
Velocitomi.
You hold the whip.
Esperos Azia Zantir. Divito magis.
Zaldrizes buzdaris cosdaur.
Idragi valere.
Nige Daenerys gel masmo entar gerio lentrot. En Valyria wipoana garixan. Valyria munioengos nuihis isa. Dova gevi. Axio osentas, menti osentas. Kiloni pilos lue vale tolvi osenetas. Inini otrikatas. Orne lue dolide prijatas. Dracarys.
That always entertains me to no end. All right. Anyway, just out of curiosity, and I'm being serious here, how many people here did not know the context for that scene? Okay, there are a couple of people. All right, so essentially, what is happening here in this scene is this is Daenerys. She's a woman. Anyway, so she is bartering with this gentleman with the bald head for an army. She is the only person on Earth that has dragons, and she's offered to give him one dragon in exchange for this entire army of 8,000 soldiers, whom you heard her refer to as Dobargeris. All right, so then he does it. Basically, he takes the dragon and she gets the army, not realizing that that was really his only protection, and then, you know, you saw the result. In hindsight, probably wasn't his best decision. Anyway, so that's the end point. The beginning is this. That's me there, and that's my computer. And if you can see this, that's where the cat scratches up the back of the chair. She likes to perch up there sometimes and poke at me. Anyway, but it basically starts with me and my computer, and my first task is to simply create the entire language. So in this case, I was creating the Valyrian language, actually two different varieties, High Valyrian and then Lower or Astapori Valyrian, the one that the slavers spoke and that the other that Daenerys spoke, which was slightly different. Creating a language, this is simplifying it, but essentially you create the entire grammar, create an initial cache of words, and then if there's a writing system, then you create that. If not, you don't. Then what happens next is I get this. So this is just a script page from episode 304 of Game of Thrones. And if you see up at the top here, here's Krasny's, and it says Valyrian and in parentheses, and then it goes like that. It's in italics, so then everything that's in italics afterwards is also supposed to be in Valyrian. It was up to me to differentiate between his Valyrian and her Valyrian, since they were going to be different. So I get this, and it's all in English, and then I return this. So this is just a sample of what I send on. This is one line in particular, the one where you heard her say, Zaldriz es buzdari ixos daor. What I do up here, that's the number of the MP3, so the actor knows which one is which. This is the line in English, the actor's name, the translation. Then the phonetic that breaks it down by syllable, putting the emphasis in all caps. And then this is a more or less literal translation, so that they know which of these words means what. And then, of course, I send on the MP3, so this is the one I sent for that.
Zaldrizes buzdari ixos daor.
Then slow.
Zaldrizes buzdari ixos daor. A dragon is not a slave.
I don't even know why I say it in English, but I do. I can never get up for saying it in English. I don't really perform it, I just say it. Anyway, when it comes to actually translating the line, basically moving from the script to this, I kind of start out here. So this is the English line I get. And based on this English line, there's going to be some inherent information in it that I take and I'm going to use when it comes to translating. So for example, seeing that this is a dragon, in High Valyrian, there isn't going to be any articles. So no the like that. So this is a unit here. And basically, the information that comes from this unit is, of course, the semantics of dragon, whatever that is. Then singular, the fact that this whole thing is singular, that it's essentially the topic of the sentence and that it's indefinite. And you can see that it differs from this one over here by this one being the comment. The verb is basically an equitive copula. Equitive copula. And so, essentially, you don't really have subject and object. It's more the thing that you already know and then the comment about it. So you're talking about a dragon, and the new information is that it is or is not whatever the comment is. And then for this verb, the information that we're getting from English is that this is in the present tense, it's negative, and that the verb is to be. As we go then, and I kind of take that information and look and kind of do a lookup in High Valyrian, I return these three words here that kind of match most closely with what's going on over there, and they bring extra information along with them. So, for example, High Valyrian has a gender system, and each of these nouns is going to have a gender. They both are the same gender in this case, and actually the gender is kind of irrelevant. More relevant is its declension class, so that you know how to turn something from a subject into an object, into an instrument, into an indirect object, and so on. And then this part, there's a whole host of extra information that comes with the verb that you don't have in English. Like in English, there's not really subject-verb agreement. We have basically agreement with a third-person singular subject in the present tense only, and then everything else is just basically the same. So But here in High Valyrian, you have agreement, total agreement with the subject in number and person. And then also, because this is negative, negative forces the verb to be in the subjunctive. So that's just extra grammatical information that I have to know in order to be able to translate this. Finally, there's a word order flip here, because in High Valyrian, the subject comes first, the object comes second, or in this case, the topic and the comment, and the verb comes at the end. And by the way, here are 3 words. And so then that basically gives us, once I do all the stuff, so basically decline these nouns. In this case, it's both the nominative or subjective case, so they don't change. And conjugate the verb. So it's third person, singular, subjunctive, present. So that turns sagon into ixos. And that gives us this sentence, Zaldrizes dohairiros ixos daor. So that's how you would translate it into High Valyrian. But of course, that's not exactly what you heard. You heard something different. And the reason for that is some extra cultural information. So this guy, like I said, he speaks Astapori Valyrian, which is a form of Valyrian that was influenced by an older language called Giscari. Essentially, he is descended from the old empire that existed there, from the people who spoke Giscari. And so they have some extra and different vocabulary than the Valyrians do. Daenerys, on the other hand, speaks High Valyrian. So for her, the word that she would translate as slave would be dohairiros. That's her word for it. However, that's not his word for it. It's not his word for it. In fact, his word is buzdari, which itself comes from Giscari and was loaned into the Valyrian that's spoken there. Part of what Daenerys is doing in this scene, throughout the previous episodes in this season, she's been pretending she didn't understand this guy at all. She's just been speaking English and has been understanding everything that he's been saying, but has been pretending that she didn't, using this translator. And that was the woman with the fantastic hair, Natalie Emanuel. Here, she's revealing, in that phrase, in fact, a dragon is not a slave, she's revealing to everybody and to him that she speaks Valyrian and understands him. So, in order to really make the point land, she uses his word for slave rather than hers, to let him know, not only do I speak this highfalutin High Valyrian, I understood all of your words as well, and I've learned them and can employ them effectively. So that's why I turned it from dohairiros into buzdari. So that's basically what I do when I translate something for a show. That's kind of like my job there. Now what I wanted to talk about was essentially issues with translation, what problems and features, I guess, things that happen when you translate stuff. So for example, this guy here, what's this? Just tell me what it is in English. Wow. I'm pretty sure I actually heard you say quadruped. Somebody say that? Or maybe ungulate? Animal? Foal? Yeah. Palomino? Anybody? No. Colt? Boy? You can call it a boy. Like my little cat, Roman. I call him my little boy. He's such a little guy. All he does is bite. Pet? Maybe. Could be somebody's pet. These are all things that it could possibly be, but usually the word that we think of is horse. It comes to mind. Of all of these words here, right, if you think about the kind of lives we live, essentially, making some assumptions here, but probably the most generic term you're going to want to use, the basic term is horse, unless there's anybody here from Marin County. Anybody from Marin? All right. You might be more familiar with horses than the rest of us. Anyway, but so that's kind of like with our basic generic American lifestyle, horse is really probably what we're going to be more familiar with. We're going to go to that word before we're going to go to other words like referring to the color of the horse, referring to the age of the horse, referring to the sex of the horse. We're just going to go with horse. But what about these folk? Now, these are the Dothraki. And, they have a lot of horse words just like we do in English, but unlike everyday average Americans, they probably use more of them more often. So in fact, these are probably the words that are more common for them. Sajo, which is specifically a horse that you use for riding, not just a generic word for horse. Vej, stallion, which is a male horse. Lame, mare, which is a female horse. Nerro, foal, referring to the other horse. But the problem comes when I get this. So I get scripts that basically say, here is the English, translate this English. And so I get a line like Rakaro, Ago, Kovaro, those are names. Take our remaining horses. It doesn't say take our remaining stallions, take our remaining steeds, take our remaining chargers, take our remaining foals, or anything like that. It just says horses. And so this word ends up getting a lot of play in Dothraki, razef, a generic word for horse, for two reasons. One, it's what is usually called for. And two, if you think about it, there are plenty of terms for horse colorings, both in Dothraki and in English. But if you're talking about filming a television show, where there are going to be actual real-life horses, it never really mentions in the script what color the horse is going to be, or what gender. In fact, I'll even bet that if there's some scene where they specifically are talking about, getting the blood from a mare or something like that, it's 50-50 that it's going to be male or female. It might actually be a male horse that ends up on screen. They both look horsey. Anyway, so this is something that is an issue with not only translation, but also with filming, that makes the actual translation somewhat less realistic than it would be if this were an actual situation. If it were an actual situation, there's very little chance that they would actually just use this word for horse. They would probably use the specific one. And it would just be, because that's just more common. I'm trying to think of a nice example in English, but I don't think there are any. Oh gosh, no, I have one. This is a fight that my wife and I have a lot, so you'll bear with me. But, all right, if you're wearing sandals, do you call those shoes? And I'm being serious. Search within your soul. Like, would you say, like, let's say that somebody owns a bunch of pairs of sandals and a bunch of pairs of shoes, and you say, hey, go put your shoes on. If they put their sandals on, have they betrayed your trust? Because that's what I feel. It's not, sandals aren't shoes, they're sandals. They're very different. And especially if you think about going to a construction site, you can't just say, oh, I put on some shoes and you're wearing flip-flops. No. It's upsetting to me. So, anyway. But, again, so yeah, horse, sandal, shoe, so on. All right, next, I often get this type of a question, what is your favorite word? Now here, of course, usually they probably meant what's my favorite word in a language that I've created. But I never really have a very good answer for it. And this is the reason. So like here are some of my favorite words, not this word in particular, nahaj, sticky, but then nahajof, which is sticky with this kind of augmentative suffix added. It means a problem that's more trouble than it's worth to deal with. I thought, that's a pretty cool word. And then there's this, this is from one of the Defiance languages. This doesn't mean anything. It's just a sound. This is a suffix that means the place of, right? If you make arap, that's the word for throat, because it's the place where you make the sound right? I thought that was pretty cool. And then here's mai, means nearby in Raytheon, one of the Defiance languages. Mai is a word that means familiarity with one's surroundings. And those are a couple of words I thought that were pretty good, but the way that I actually found them was just randomly looking through my dictionaries in preparing for this talk, because I can never think of any of these words. And the reason why is, again, this. Take our remaining horses. That's what I'm asked to translate. I'm never asked to translate something like, that's so unintentionally hilarious. But like, if I were asked to translate that into Castithan for Defiance, and I could use this word, which I think is really cool. It's boranje, it means unintentionally hilarious. It has a single word for it. It's a fun word too. It comes from the Boro bird. And the Boro bird, when it puts its wings together, and you look at it from the back, it's a white bird with kind of these two dots on the wings, and when its tongue, and when the tail comes out, it looks like a face sticking out its tongue at you when it has its wings closed with its back to you. And so you add an augmentative suffix and then a little adjectival suffix, and it's like essentially being like the Boro bird, which is unintentionally hilarious. So, yeah, one of my favorite words, but the thing is, if I'm stuck with what the material is in the script, then I have to translate whatever the material is in the script. I can't use all of these fancy words that I just created because I thought they were cool. They just never seem to come up. And since they never come up, I forget that they exist. There are tons of words in there that are like that are probably really cool that I just have no idea of anymore. Anyway, also, a different issue. How many people know what this movie is? Anybody? 1936? First year where there was a Best Supporting Actor and Best Supporting Actress Oscar. The only movie to be nominated in all 4 acting categories and lose them all. This is My Man Godfrey. This is, well, now one of my favorite movies, but it was one of my wife's favorite movies. And I've probably seen this movie literally over 300 times. Probably more than that, probably more than 1,000 times, because my wife likes to watch it as she's going to sleep. So it's just on. We have it memorized completely forwards and backwards, which means that phrases like this are used all the time by me and Aaron. So, for example, if I were to say to you in this tone, "What is food?" you would answer, "Something you eat, silly." See? Because it's a line from the movie. And then there's, of course, "Life is but an empty bubble. You should take a liver pill." I don't want a liver pill. And then one of my favorites that I like to say a lot, "Let's you and I take a long taxi ride out Van Cortlandt Way." So yeah, these phrases are a part of me and my wife's vocabulary. Essentially, they're as real as words to us. But if you compare, say, me and my wife, Erin, to everyone else, right? So this phrase here, "life is but an empty bubble," probably does not get a lot of use, whereas it does get a lot of use with us versus, you know, other phrases like "what's up," "thanks a lot," "sorry about that." Probably that. By the way, notice that we say "thanks a lot" and "sorry about that" more than everybody else. We're slightly more polite. All right. Anyway, now if you compare that to Dothraki, let's just take 2 random potential Dothraki speakers. There's probably also variation. Here are some just Dothraki phrases. "Atavrazar," which means excellent, "Menenesa," which means it is known, "Gifinyeni," which kind of means WTF, and "Fonaschek," which is one way of saying goodbye. So you can imagine that there might be one Dothraki speaker where that's kind of his favorite way of saying goodbye, and another one where he doesn't say that as much. Maybe he says "Hajas" or something like that, or "Dothraschek," another way of saying goodbye. This is just casual interspeaker variation, something that we all have. And just think about how often you say goodbye versus bye-bye versus somebody else. You know, it's slight differences like that. And then, of course, if you've ever read Henry James, my goodness, he just must use this word like every other word. I think it was Portrait of a Lady, where it's like, I open up the book and I'm like, all right, we're reading this for class. And then the very first sentence is this word. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm like, well, maybe I can just get by. And then it's like 2 sentences later, fastidious. 3 sentences later, fastidiousness. I'm like, oh, God, all right, fine. I'll go to my dictionary, you jerk. All right, so, yeah. So anyway, the kind of variation that you see here is the same kind of variation here. All of these are basically saying the same thing. They're just different ways of saying it. Ordinarily, if you think about this in the context of dialogue, this is something that is the writer's job. That is, it's the writer's job to kind of define the idiolect, personal dialect of a character, to decide how it is they speak. Are they overly polite? Are they overly wordy? Are they very glib? Do they try to be humorous and things like that? That's something the writer takes care of in the dialogue. But it actually really doesn't ever come up when they're working with non-English dialogue, especially non-English dialogue in a created language. There, everybody pretty much speaks exactly the same. And so it's very difficult to kind of, as the translator, inject some of this interpersonal variation that you'd see in a natural language. Very difficult. Anyway. Last example I wanted to show you. You might be familiar with this painting. It's called Nu descendant un escalier, a nu descending a staircase, number 2, I think, by Marcel Duchamp. And basically, when I looked at this painting for the first time, I just saw a whole mess of nothing. It looks like a bunch of sticks. This was like the most information that I could even get out of it. I was like, okay, well, if that's the title, there must be a staircase in there. and somebody's naked, I guess. Anyway, so yeah, it's an abstract or cubist / futurist painting, and it is what it is. And I really didn't give it a second thought. I saw it, and you have an aesthetic reaction that's mainly based on kind of the colors and the shapes. So I thought, oh, okay, that looks pretty good. But I didn't really think anything about it. And if somebody told me to describe it, I could not. Now let me introduce you to my friend John Quijada. This is a picture that was taken of him for an article that was done on him in the New Yorker that makes him look weird. And so I decided to use it. He hates it. Anyway, I think it's funny. Anyway, John Quijada is a good friend of mine, and he created a language called Ithquil. Ithquil is a language where he decided to create a language that had 3 goals. Basically, to express as much as possible, as unambiguously as possible, in as succinctly as possible. So this is not a naturalistic language. It's not like one that you would find in the world. It's not one that humans can even speak very well. But and to give you an example of how it works, this is an example from his website. We have this 2-word sentence. That's the sentence. And it means, on the contrary, I think it may turn out that this rugged mountain range trails off at some point. All of that meaning and grammar is packed into these 2 words. And if you can actually go to his website to look at exactly how it translates. It's really fascinating. But the idea here is that what you have to use, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, however many words that is. I'm going to guess 17. What you have to say in 17 words in English, you can express with 2 words in Ithquil. It's a nightmare to pronounce, but it's actually pretty compact. So that was the goal of the language, and that's what he did. So something that John did was he decided to tackle this painting and describe it. And so this is what he did. He created a sentence, starting with this word, aukras, which means to descend at an oblique angle, followed by ekuta, imaginary representation of a woman as self-initiator of action. Ogveusla, without a set of clothing as coverage. And then there's deno ilqua, along the directional vector of an imaginary representation of a staircase. That's actually all in there. Palshi, in a repetitive series of single manifestations. And then finally, the big word at the end, augwaik stul nambu, which is by means of a tightly integrated set of ambulatory bodily movements which combine into a 3-dimensional trail wake behind her, forming a timeless emergent whole to be considered intellectually, emotionally, and aesthetically. So this is the whole sentence, and what that sentence means, this is a description of the painting, an imaginary representation of a nude woman in the midst of descending a staircase in a step-by-step series of tightly integrated ambulatory bodily movements which combine into a 3-dimensional wake behind her, forming a timeless, emergent whole to be considered intellectually, emotionally, and aesthetically. That is that, which I found absolutely astounding. Because where before I just saw nothing, I just saw like a bunch of sticks and color, I actually saw what the painting is either supposed to be, or at least what John thought the painting was supposed to be. And an interesting point about his translation is that he always thought that the figure was a woman, and so he included that in his translation. But I've heard arguments that it's actually not a woman, that it's actually just some androgynous figure. And indeed, in the French, the word nude is masculine, so you could come up with the interpretation that it's male or just genderless. But one bizarre thing about this is that I now actually can't unsee what that sentence describes now. I can't see the painting the way I used to be able to see it. I can only see what that bizarre translation now shows me. So even though it kind of illuminated the painting for me, it also destroyed my previous conception of what the painting was, which is a bizarre thing if you think about what translation is supposed to be. So yeah, back to this thing. I could tell you what this is. Basically, it's a glyph from a language that I created many, many years ago. And it's a glyph that in many circumstances would be pronounced kala. And it would mean either to talk or talking or speak or speaking. But I don't think that basically I've come to the determination with translation that I don't think that there's any way to perfectly translate experience. I just don't think that it's possible. You can kind of get at it, you can get close to it, you can get good enough. You can get to the point where if you ask somebody for the salt and they don't give you the salt, you're being a jerk. We've gotten that far. But given my connection with the language, the fact that I created the whole language, I created this word, I created this symbol, I don't think that there's any way for me to express how I feel when I see this to you. Anyway. Hence the problem of translation, a bizarre and muddled little thing that is now my bizarre and muddled little job. Anyway, so that's me. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. And now I will spend the rest of the time answering your questions. Oh, there's somebody else's iPhone here. Do you want it? Can I have it? It's a 6, isn't it? Really? Oh. What? It is not. Wait, this is not an iPhone 5. Yeah, it's a 6. It's bigger than mine anyway. All right, but anyway, so yeah. Any questions that anybody has about anything that I've ever done or things that I haven't done, I will answer them all perfectly.